Okay, so I had the pleasure of getting to read chapter 46, Animal Reproduction. There was a lot in this chapter that I found very interesting, some of it that I found somewhat unnerving and uncomfortable, and then also some of it that I totally did not understand. So I think that Doc and I talked a little bit, and he's going to probably enlighten us on some things that he understands in more depth after I'm finished. My plan for the lecture, just so you guys have a good idea, is I'm going to split you four into two different groups, and we're going to have a quick little test going on where you guys are going to try to answer questions that I present, and then in the end there's a whole point system that will see who got more of the points.
What's the reward for winning?
I was going to give you guys money or something, but I ended up not doing that. If you want, I've got some change, so maybe we'll do like a 25-cent reward, or 50 cent, you get to split it. We'll do that. Okay, so let's see. First in the chapter, it just kind of addresses asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. And so I'm going to talk about the asexual reproduction, which I found was pretty cool. There are multiple forms of asexual reproduction. You can either have an organism that just splits like right down the middle. It says, hey, guess what? I'm two of them now, you know. And some of the examples they gave were like, I think sponges and other types of animals like that can literally just chop itself up and then grow. And that's known as fission, where it separates into two identical, approximately the same size. There's also another form that's fragmentation and regeneration. This is more similar to what we talked about like with starfish. Starfish, you can chop off part of their leg, but then also if you get part of their brain or the center part, that one limb will then grow into the rest of the organism. So it fragments itself, and then from that fragmentation, it can regenerate into a new organism, which I think is pretty fascinating. And then the final one is parthenogenesis, which is basically an egg developing without ever being fertilized. That's actually kind of something that I didn't really know existed. And it's actually pretty popular among animals that I didn't even realize. So when they reproduce, that means that they can either reproduce just by themselves, a female, just be like, hey, yeah, I'm going to make a baby now, you know? And she can do it all by herself. And so that means that the cell can either be haploid or diploid, which is pretty cool. And that's common in like ants or bees or wasps and things like that. They can do that. So that was pretty awesome. Okay. This is a pretty simple, do you guys remember pedigrees from when you did biology before? This photo here, not necessarily exactly sure how to zoom in on that, but you can see it all right. On this thing? Hey. Okay, that's upside down for you guys. So this was a good visualization for me just because I'm a visual learner. Asexual reproduction, basically they just show them as females. The circles are females. And then if you also remember, they have it empty if it's not affected and solid if it is. That doesn't matter here, but I just remember thinking it was a good way to look at it. So you have a female offspring, those offspring make offspring, those offspring make offspring. Whereas in this one, you kind of tag a male along in order to get that to happen. So that's the difference between the sexual and asexual reproduction. Okay, let's see. Reproductive cycles. Reproductive cycles are just basically ways that animals know, okay, this is going to be a good time for me to have kids. So I'm going to get pregnant. For example, I know that sheep get pregnant, I think right around like the beginning times of winter. So and then it actually gives birth in spring because that's the best time for the baby sheep to be there is springtime because the temperature is warmer, things are nicer, it's easier for the livelihood of the animal. So there's a lot of different animals that will mate at certain times and also will allow themselves to be fertilized at certain times just so that they can have babies be around when it's the best time to have them. Something really interesting is because of the climate change in certain regions, it affects certain animals. So like the caribou started producing less and less over a 14-year period just because of a slight temperature difference. Kind of threw off their reproduction cycle, and they didn't necessarily know what to do. So it's definitely interesting taking a look at that and realizing how everything on Earth affects things that are living. Okay. Some animals that reproduce asexually still go through the business of acting like they're having sex, which is interesting. So there are some animals that will pretend that they're having sex, but like they're not, and they're just going through the motions, and then later it'll be like, yeah, I'm going to have a baby now. But it's totally unrelated to having sex. And in the book, it even says at one point in time they probably were not an asexual species. They would probably reproduce sexually. So they go through the act of having sex because it actually allows them to release certain hormones in their own bodies, and then they can reproduce asexually. There's actually a certain type of lizard that does that. It mentions it in the book. Okay. Hermaphrodites are both male and female. Hermaphrodites, I said that correct, Doc? Is that? So that's kind of weird, but also pretty cool. If a species is having trouble reproducing sexually, it can say, hey, I still need to have offspring. We need to keep our lineage going down, and they can make that happen. Okay, so going on to fertilization, that's concept 46.2. The fertilization talks about external fertilization and also internal fertilization. So it reminded me of when we were at the spawnery, or the hatchery, how they spawn. So if something, if a female lays their eggs and then a male comes into play and says, hey, I'm going to go ahead and put all my sperm all over these eggs, that's an example of external, which is kind of what they did at the hatchery, or that's how those fish function. Whereas internal would be the opposite. The female keeps the eggs and then the male comes in separately. Or comes into the female, and then that'd be the internal.
Olivia has a question.
Yes.
Okay, so a hermaphrodite, that's how you say it, do they reproduce sexually or asexually? Because since they have both male and female parts, right?
Right, so from what I was reading is they can do both. Doc, correct me if I'm wrong. Hermaphrodite, they can either reproduce sexually or asexually, depending on the environment.
A lot of worms are hermaphrodites. They have both parts. They have a male part and a female part. If there is no other male or female around, they just do the dirty themselves. If there's another one around, then they have a partner to work with.
Right, and for example, I think they used like hammerhead sharks. I don't see that part that I'm remembering, but there were several animals that they used as an example, like, I remember it was a hammerhead shark, that they left it in like a zoo or like in a cage by itself, and then one day she was pregnant. It was like, how did that happen? So, good question though. Let's see. Pheromones. Pheromones are basically a scent that an animal can put off to be like, hey, don't I smell good? And then it attracts the other sex, and bam, and they do the sex. So, yeah, exactly. So it's just interesting that some animals have pheromones, some animals don't. Let's see. So, fertilization, when you do it through spawning, so externally, and you have the eggs that are outside of the body and then they're fertilized externally, you have a lot more eggs, but the percentage of survival is a lot lower than if it's internal. So internally, it's just a lot better because the percentage is higher, but there's a lot fewer of them. It's just the percentage of survival of that zygote is a lot higher. Gonads. Gonads are organs that help produce gametic cells. help produce the cells that you need to be able to reproduce. So gonads, you know.
Good job.
Okay, so spermathecate is basically a pouch that females will carry around and be like, all right, so I went ahead and duped this guy into having relations with me, and I'm just going to hold on to his sperm for however long I want it. And when I'm ready to have children, I'll have children. So I think that a lot of people nowadays wishes that females had that in our society, because then it'd be like, hey, I can just, hold on to your stuff, and then later, when I want to, we can decide to have kids. So I think that's kind of a cool little trigger that some animals have. So now we're on 1019, and remember these pages and where I'm talking about these things so you can go back and find details. So concept 46.3, reproductive organs produce and transport gametes. Okay. So this is pictures of men on that page. And so they actually go ahead and show the urethra, scrotum, the testes, and all these different parts that you can study. I went ahead and did highlight a few things, and it's so short, the male section, that this page, I do have a couple questions on it, but you'll be able to find it rather quickly when we go over the test, and you'll learn about it then.
Test. We go over the test.
Yeah. So, okay, so the penis is a good one. So when that enlarges so that it can be inserted into the female, I didn't actually really fully get this until I read this chapter, which is great. But it essentially blocks off the exit of blood from the penis. This is why it stays erect. But then there are certain things that you can do to get an erectile dysfunction, like if you drink way too much alcohol. That basically means that the male can no longer hold all the blood there, so that it just escapes. So that's something that I didn't fully understand. It makes a lot more sense now that I read this chapter, which was nice. Which was very nice to know. Okay, so then the female, Doc pronounces it oogenesis. I believe that Marie from last year pronounced it oogenesis, but we'll have to have them have a battle of the bio teachers later. But oogenesis is the development of a mature egg. So the egg has to go through, it's basically like the egg is sleeping for its whole life, for the life of the female. And it's just kind of not really activated. And then oogenesis is kind of the development of the oocyte, which is the place where the egg will then go to be fertilized, correct? Is at the oocyte? Or oocyte?
Oocyte is the egg itself.
Okay. So the oocyte is the egg itself. And then oogenesis is the development of the oocyte. So, anyway, some interesting stuff. Mammary glands are present in both males and females, but the mammary glands are basically the secretion of milk after mom has a child, which is pretty interesting because it doesn't have anything to do with the development of the zygote or the child, but it rather has to do with after it's delivered, hey, we're glad that we've got some food for this kid that was made for this kid. So mammary glands located in the nipple region. Secretion of milk. Okay, concept 46.4. The interplay of topic and sex hormones regulates mammalian reproduction. So a lot of this starts getting a bit confusing on my end. Doc was great to help me with a little bit of the explanation of it. I found most interesting the differences between male and females. Males have a lot more testosterone than females, which explains why I have such a bad attitude sometimes. And males also kind of have their entire life, they're basically trying to sustain, after puberty, it's trying to sustain the same amount of hormones, whereas in a female, they go through these cycles where hormone levels are not the same in their blood flow, and that's why they're so calm and collected all the time. So, no, it's actually really it's really great explanation about the difference between males and females and why there is a difference. And it actually even explains in this concept about on page 1026 about why these different hormones are being released, when they're being released, and why that's important for the cycle of through the ovarian cycle and the uterine cycle, which is happening during menstruation. So, let's see, menopause. Menopause, which is funny. I was talking to my wife about menopause the other day, and we were trying to figure out what the word for it was. We couldn't remember. And we both got super frustrated because we couldn't remember such a simple word. And finally I said something like, yeah, basically it just puts a pause on everything. And she went, menopause. So menopause does basically put a pause on everything. There's about 500 cycles in a woman's lifetime, and after those 500 cycles, that's it. Everything stops. So there are, in fact, a lot more eggs than 500, or oocytes, or oocytes. There's a lot more of them. There's actually millions of them at birth, I guess. But over time, they disappear. Doc will be able to explain a little more on it. But that's actually really cool. I thought that there were only 500 when I was reading the book. But there are a lot more, in fact, than that. Okay, so 46.5. This is, in placental mammals, an embryo develops fully within the mother's uterus. So, as a lot of us are familiar, the baby is born inside of the mother. Conception occurs, with the fertilization of the egg and the sperm, which makes a zygote, which we've kind of gone through that whole process. And then basically through the process of meiosis, the cells start duplicating, and then you got multiple cells that are kind of in a cluster. And then after that, actually it's really quick. If you even go to the next page on 1030, within 5 weeks, there's artery limb buds. Looks like little fins. It's kind of funny. You can see a picture of it. I'll put it out here, actually. Looks like a fish, but just within 5 weeks, you got limb buds, eyes, the heart, the liver. Just within 5 weeks. It's really cool. And then 14 weeks, it actually looks more like a human being. Whereas I think in the first 5 weeks, it sort of looks like a... You guys ever seen the movie Aliens?
Yep.
Kind of looks like one of those guys. Ah! Yeah. And then obviously at 20 weeks, you've really got, a baby that's pretty big, 20 centimeters. 5 weeks, just 1 centimeter long. But you can still see it's got a head, eyes, little hands. You can even kind of make out the fingers. So there's 5 of them. Okay, so let's see. This is female pictures on the other page of females actually basically having the baby. So after it fully develops, you get rid of it through the area where you originally got it from. So that's pretty cool. I think I thought that women pooped out babies until I was like, 24. Okay. This was actually super awesome to look at. This diagram right here, and this is just personal use rather than like uncomfortable stuff. This is actually, I never understood where in the lines these things fell. So this is different forms of contraception, and then they even talk about abortion and what the difference is between those two. Basically, abortion is if it happens after the zygote is formed. That's how you can consider it as abortion. But contraception is basically saying, hey, let's never allow that sperm to meet the egg. Let's never introduce them ever, so they don't start going through meiosis. Vasectomy, hope I never get one. But it's production of sperm, so that you could do that. That would be a form of contraception. But it goes all the way down to like the morning after pill, and it shows. So this is like kind of stopping it right away. And the further down you get, here are condoms, and you keep going further and further down. Finally, the meeting of the sperm in the oocyte, or an oocyte. But this was really cool for me to look at, just because it gave me a better idea and allowed me to conceptualize more accurately what exactly all these things that people are talking about. The day after pill. What's the difference between that and never taking a contraceptive pill? What's the difference? So. Okay, and then it also goes on talking about in vitro and in vitro fertilization, which is basically where sometimes there are issues with the female where they're not able to properly do the whole original cycle of introducing the egg and sperm, and it doesn't go very well, but they still want to have children. So thankfully science has figured out ways that they can introduce those two guys in a lab and kind of do a little incubation process and allow it to start develop, and then they'll take that development and then place it back inside the mom, and the mom can actually give birth to her child, which I think is a great thing personally, but obviously I don't know, there's probably people with different opinions, but I think that's pretty cool that they've been able to allow parents to do that even when they're not able to. That is it. So now we'll do a little game that went longer than I thought it would. I guess I did have